Katimat Stano, we'll begin. My name is Ovide Mercredi. I'm from a place called Mississippi, or Grand Rapids in English. I'm currently working at this university as a senior advisor to the President Barnard, and I will be moderating the panel this afternoon. So I begin by welcoming you and thanking you for showing up and paying for your free tickets. We're very fortunate to have Dr. David Suzuki with us today. He's currently involved in a national tour from Newfoundland to British Columbia, raising awareness about the environment, climate change, pollution, and so on. A work that he has maintained throughout his life. But this time with an additional message for action, which will become apparent as the panelists make their presentations. I will begin by inviting our President Barnard, to the podium to make his welcoming address, and then I'll carry on from there.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. I want to thank Elder David Courchene for leading the sacred pipe and water ceremonies and blanket ceremony this morning, and thanks to everyone who participated in these traditions of honor and respect in preparation for the work that was to follow. I'm told that this morning's discussion on the importance of respecting treaties was valuable and important for the future that we all want to work together to create. I want to thank Ovide for doing this work and for his agreeing to work in the capacity he described as senior advisor. He's nominally senior advisor to the president, but I find that I run into members of the university community regularly who say, I've been talking to Ovide. So I think other people are getting more of his time than I am, but that's great. That's good that it works that way. I also want to acknowledge the President's presence of Tara Cullis, President and co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation, and David Suzuki's wife, and Severn Cullis Suzuki, board member of the foundation, and Dr. Suzuki's daughter. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. It's an honor to be here today with award-winning scientist, environmentalist, and broadcaster, Dr. David Suzuki. Using the words of our own branding, he's a defender who recognizes the value of Aboriginal lands and traditions. He's a visionary who helps us all celebrate Canada's vast beauty and reminds us of our role in its protection. Dr. Suzuki, we're sincerely excited to share in a conversation with you this afternoon. We appreciate your time and thoughtful insight, and I want to thank you and the other panelists. We're looking forward to their remarks. Thank you all for coming.
As I said earlier, David Suzuki is in Winnipeg as part of a national tour, and this evening at the Burton Cummings Theatre, there's an event that I hope you paid for. That starts at 7 o'clock this evening, and it'll be a celebration for all the people that stand up for the places we love and for the earth we respect. It'll be a special evening of inspiration, music, and learning. David will be joined by special guests of the foundation, such as Chris Dirksen, Tanya Tagak, Fred Penner, Syria Noble, and there will be a performance by the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. I think they do this or something. They don't have the power, I know that. Anyway, what I'll do is to make things go smoothly, and I'll introduce all the panelists first. And then we'll go into the format that we have set for the afternoon. Waniska David. David Suzuki has a Cree name for my community. We call him Kimisumino. Can you say that? Kimisumino. I didn't hear that guy. Try again. Kimisumino. Yeah, that's it. Good. It means our grandfather. It's a very special name. Because of his work in protecting the environment, water, and for his support of Aboriginal people and their concerns for many decades. David is the co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation, and he is an award-winning scientist, an environmentalist, and a broadcaster. He's a genius. I can't pronounce certain words, David, so you'll have to do it for me. How do you say people that work with genes? Geneticist. There you go. Very good. He holds an honors degree.
Gynecologist. Not gynecologist.
Oh, not that kind. All right. He made that pretty clear, didn't he? Yeah. Anyway, he has an honors degree in biology, a PhD in zoology, and is now Professor Emeritus at the University of British Columbia. He's been given numerous awards, holds 25 honorary degrees, and was elected to the Royal Society of Canada, and is a companion of the Order of Canada. Dr. Suzuki is also an author. He's written 52 books, one of them he read, and is recognized as the world leader in sustainable ecology. Earlier this year, our Indigenous community honored him for his leadership in protecting the sacred lands and for being a strong voice, an advocate for Aboriginal and treaty rights in Canada. Sitting beside him is our president, Dr. Barnard, and also the Vice-Chancellor for the University of Manitoba, and the current chair of the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada. Dr. Barnard holds a PhD in computer science, which means he knows how to count. He's from the University of Toronto, and his research has been supported by the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, international agencies, and industry. President Barnard has demonstrated a strong commitment to promoting Indigenous achievement in this university and in collaboration with other universities in this province, as well as Aboriginal communities. And beside him is Aimée Craft, a young lady and an Indigenous lawyer who joined the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Law as an assistant professor in July. She has expertise in Anishinaabe and Canadian Aboriginal law. Her award-winning 2013 book called Breathing Life into the Stoneford Treaty focuses on understanding and interpreting treaties from Anishinaabe and Innuit legal perspective. Ms. Craft also leads a project on Anishinaabe water law, and in her legal practice has worked with many Indigenous people on the land, resources and consultation, human rights, and governance issues. And my friend David Courchene Jr. is recognized for his leadership throughout the years, not only in his community but internationally, for promoting world peace, but also sharing a message of hope and peace from the perspective of the Indigenous community. He shares an ancient Indigenous knowledge that he believes can be the foundation in supporting more respect for Mother Earth, as well as ensuring that our people have a voice in this country in dealing with issues involving the environment and world peace. He has created a special place for sharing ancient Indigenous knowledge called the Turtle Lodge, built based on a vision he received many years ago. I have known David for many years, and at one time I perceived him as being one of our primary political leaders in this country, but instead of choosing politics, he chose spirituality. And we are honored to have him here today as part of this panel. And he has always worked hard to inspire young people. And that guy over there, the far side, that's not Custer. I want you to be very clear. That is not, this man is our friend. He is a true friend. That's Dr. David R. Boyd. He's an environmental lawyer, a professor, author, and one of the world's leading experts on the relationships between human rights and environmental protection. He is an adjunct professor in resource and environmental management at Simon Fraser University, an associate faculty in the School of Environment and Sustainability at Royal Roads University, and was recently a Trudeau Scholar at the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. Mr. Boyd has advised many governments on environmental issues, and his current research focuses on the effects of enshrining the constitutional right to live in a healthy environment, a right now recognized at least in 100 nations. That is a panel. Please welcome them. Now, one of the powers that I have is to decide who goes first. So I've decided our guest will go last. And the reason why I'm hoping David will go last is because I want you to stay in the room. Sorry, guys. So each panelist will have 5 minutes to just express themselves from the heart so that you get to know them a little bit, but they also get to put their message across. And that includes the president of this university. So I'm going to begin with David from the far side. Oh, I don't know if you noticed it, but David. And that's called Indian planning. and Aimée also means David. Now that's called spiritual planning. So they tell me David means the blessed one, the beloved one, the beloved one. We'll see if it's true. Yeah. So we'll begin with the remote David. Astam. Or you could do it there if you want. It's up to you.
Well, let me begin by saying what an honor it is to be on a panel with all of these other Davids. I'm here because I've been working with David Suzuki on his latest national tour. I hope it's not his last national tour, the Blue Dot Tour. And this is a tour that's based on a fundamental belief that all of us, every single person in this room, every single person in this country, has a fundamental human right which our governments refuse to recognize. And that is our right to live in a healthy environment, to breathe clean air, to drink safe drinking water, to enjoy access to flourishing biodiversity and fertile soil. This is a human right that is now recognized by over 180 of the United Nations' 193 countries. So there are only about a dozen holdouts, and Canada, to my embarrassment and to all of our collective shame, is one of those holdouts. Why does the right to a healthy environment matter? Well, take a look at this country. As of today, there are over 100 First Nations where the reserves do not have access to safe drinking water. The very worst air quality in this country is experienced by the Aimée First Nation on the outskirts of Sarnia, Ontario. If you look at who is on the front lines of climate change, not just in Canada, but globally, it's the Inuit people of the North, the Arctic Athabascan people of the North. If you look at who in Canada carries the worst body burden of toxic chemicals, PCBs, mercury, lead, it's the people of Northern Canada. And so every day in this beautiful country of ours, there are ongoing human rights violations of that fundamental right to live in a healthy environment. And so this is where we come together as a people and say, our job is to tell governments that they have an obligation to recognize our right to live in a healthy environment. It's not an option, it's an obligation. And because the focus here today is on the relationship between First Nations and the Aboriginal people and our environment, I do want to say that there's some very essential learnings that we as a Canadian society can learn from our brothers and sisters in Aboriginal communities. And just two of those things that I want to touch on in my first 5-minute spiel here is that, number one, those rights that I mentioned that are being violated were also in all of our resource management and environmental protection actions or inactions. We're also failing dismally to take the rights of future generations into account. And this is something that came up in the ceremony this morning, that the ones who come after us need to have a voice in our political processes and our resource management decisions. And the other thing I want to say is that this notion of a right to a healthy environment only occurred to people in Western society as recently as the 1960s. It was Rachel Carson who first wrote about this in her classic book, Silent Spring. And it wasn't first formally expressed in writing until the 1972 Stockholm Declaration that came out of the world's first big environmental summit. But this notion that there is a right to live in a healthy environment, and equally importantly, responsibilities to protect and take care of the living environment, is something that goes back hundreds and even thousands of years in Indigenous cultures all around the world, including in Canada. So if you look at Anishinaabe laws and traditions, if you look at Haida laws and traditions and cultures and values, this notion of a reciprocal rights and responsibilities between human beings and the rest of the living and natural world is at the heart of that. And I just want to close my opening remarks by saying that Aboriginal communities, despite the challenges they face in Canada, are leading the way in showing us how we can respect the rights of humans to live in a healthy environment and the rights of Mother Earth, the rights of nature. 4 quick examples from British Columbia. The Haida Nation is a coastal First Nation who, through applying their values, their traditions, their laws, has managed to ensure that over half of the lands where they live, over half of Haida Gwaii, is in protected status. So that means no industrial development in those Haida protected areas, Haida spiritual areas, and Haida cultural areas. And not coincidentally, setting aside half of the land base is approximately what biologists tell us is needed to maintain healthy biological diversity. My second example comes from the Chilcotin. The Chilcotin First Nation has fought a long battle against mining companies that wanted to destroy an entire lake, Fish Lake, to use it as a tailings pond for a gold mine. They have fought that battle for decades. This year they won an outstanding decision from the Supreme Court of Canada, which recognized for the first time in a Canadian court the concept of Aboriginal title, ownership of land. And just recently, the Chilcotin First Nation determined that that area around Fish Lake would be set aside as a tribal heritage area for all time. The third example I'll give you is from the Sauk First Nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island. They are Canada's first Aboriginal solar community. And as their chief says, Aboriginal cultures have existed on solar energy for thousands of years. Why stop now? So they've actually installed solar photovoltaic panels on all of the band offices and band buildings, and they are generating 75% of their electricity now from solar power. And the last example I'll give just quickly is from the Nitchalneth First Nation, again a coastal group on Vancouver Island. And some of you are old enough like me to remember back in the 1990s when there was a huge controversy about logging in a place called Clayoquot Sound, some of the most majestic old-growth forests in Canada and in fact in the world. And the Nitchalneth made a stand that said, we don't want industrial clear-cut logging in Clayoquot Sound. And at the time, we had a responsible provincial government who put together a special panel of scientists and First Nations leaders to combine Western science and traditional ecological knowledge. And based on Nitchalneth law, they set aside a number of areas in Clayoquot Sound and determined the very strict rules that could be used on logging in certain areas of Clayoquot Sound. And so those are just 4 examples of how First Nations in Canada are showing us that it's possible to respect the right to a healthy environment, respect the rights of Mother Nature, and live a prosperous life in Canada as well. So thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Elder David Courchene.
Thank you very much, Ovide. Ojoanin, the Nemagnetuk. Miigwech Minanga na, Chibiog Ego Kituan, Miweg Gemanito, Miwe Madzenegaichi, Mini Guang Minanongum, Miigwech Gendana, Gemanito Egi, Binat, Nibioge, Kevingayat, Anishnabe. My dear relatives, I welcome you to the center and the heart of the continent and the sacred place of Manitoba. And as we begin here this afternoon, I offer words of gratitude to the Great Spirit, Gje Manitou, for the great vision of life. As the original peoples of this land, we have the distinction of being the roots of our homeland. And this positions us with the responsibility to be the voice of our homeland, who we refer to as Memenush. And I call upon the spirit of the ancestors to come within our presence. And in a humble request, I ask, help us to show respect for nature's authority that is based on balance and harmony. Help us to return the deep love we all receive from Memenush, Mother Earth. Help us to follow nature's laws that serve to nurture, to teach, and guide our lives towards survival. Help us to return to the beginning that holds the memory of the original instructions we were all given on how to be a human being that reflects respect and kindness for all of life. Join us as we walk together in the footsteps of our ancestors as they lead us into the future when finally we will treat each other as equals, and where we can treat our home, Miminosh, with the deep, profound love and respect that she deserves. As a people, we've always been waiting for this time to be given recognition for the leadership that we believe is an inherent right that our great Creator has given us. And we believe that in this leadership that we have the responsibility to speak on behalf of the earth and its natural laws, which is an exercise of our leadership. The duty and responsibility we have as a birthright of established leadership within our homeland. I'm always very encouraged when I'm given this opportunity to offer words, and I always try to stay connected to Spirit. that it will be the Spirit that will guide me and fill my mind with the words that I need to speak so my fellow human beings would be inspired the way that I have been inspired by the earth itself. And that is to show love and kindness toward the earth itself. We face some incredible challenges as the human family. And I believe that we have an opportunity today in this part of the world to set the foundation, to set and create a new and better world. In prophecy, it was said that it's been given to us through our prophets and visionaries that it'd be here in America that the truth would be revealed. There is a silent movement that's sweeping across the land, and that movement is where our people have returned back to the lodges and to recapture and restore that spirit that our ancestors had lived and survived by for thousands of years. And my message here today is, I call upon each and every one of you to accept the sacred universal duty that we were all given, and that was to truly love our children. And we love our children by allowing them the opportunity to be able to experience the land the way that we have enjoyed it for thousands of years. Let us stop denying them that opportunity to feel the love of the land. We must revolutionize the whole education system. We must disengage from these concepts that are destroying the world. And there's so much discussion in terms of economic development and all these developments. And the elders would advise us, go back to the beginning to seek resolution. Because in the spiritual world is where the higher intelligence exists. We're operating from a human level, that is, we've minimized ourselves, and we have not allowed our full potential to be expressed as human beings. Simply because we have not connected ourselves to the higher influence of Spirit. Join us as we come forward, reflecting our leadership in our homeland. Thank you very much. Miigwech.
Our next speaker is Aimée Craft.
Bonjour, dinwe maganiduk kiwineno dine koindishnakas, mekanaki koindishnakas, maingan and dodem. So happy to be here. Want to acknowledge this territory and acknowledge my ancestors who were part of making treaties in this territory. Both the Métis, who negotiated what I view as a treaty with the federal government for the entry into Confederation of the Métis into Canada, and Treaty 1, document made, a concluded agreement of over 140 years ago, which makes it 7 generations ago. So I represent that 7th generation that was in the mind of our ancestors, and those are who I have in my mind today as I stand here and accept the honor to speak with these distinguished panelists. I want to note that I feel an extreme responsibility to those children that are coming 7 generations forward, and those who have taught us 7 generations back. But I also want to note that when I speak, I'm conscious of my role as a woman. And I sit amongst men on this panel, and you've heard from many of them, and they have very strong teaching voices and care very deeply for the earth and our children, and I thank them and acknowledge them for that. But I also want to acknowledge the women that do that work on a day-to-day basis in bringing life and in caring for life and in cherishing that sacred connection that women have with earth and water, and in assuming that great responsibility, which I take very seriously, and I hope you'll join me in acknowledging that work. What I hope to talk about is Anishinaabe law, and many of you will say, what is Anishinaabe law? And some of you have heard me talk about it on some occasions, and I want to dispel the idea and myths that Canadian and Western legal systems put in our minds about rights and obligations. And I want us to focus instead on looking at Anishinaabe law as a source of understanding what our responsibilities are, full stop. I think in that we have some very powerful solutions in terms of how we govern ourselves as people, as communities, as nations. What are our responsibilities towards one another? Not what will I get out of this relationship, what right do I have to exercise in this relationship, but what responsibility, inherent responsibility do I have? And that's the foundation of Anishinaabe law. Anishinaabe law is also totally rooted in relationship, and we see that manifesting today in the relationships that we're all creating together. Whereas Western law focuses on individualism and property to a large extent. Those of you who are my law students, you know that I talk about that all the time. But Anishinaabe law gives us a different framework and a different perspective. It talks to us about manifesting, honoring relationships that are not necessarily always reciprocal, not always manifestly reciprocal, but that we live in multiple forms. And it encourages not the right to property and protection of property, but the right to minobimatiswin, which is a good life. And good life is very different than having property, and a good life requires that we ensure that those around us have a good life. And so I think there are some very powerful messages from Anishinaabe law that we can draw that help us understand how to protect our healthy environment. And I want to say to the Davids that I have some good news for you. The right to a healthy environment is constitutionally protected. It's protected by our Anishinaabe Constitution. It's in the pipe that you sat with this morning, and it's in the little boy water drum that many of us have sat with before. And our job now is to open the eyes of decision makers, lawmakers, to see that that Constitution and that obligation is right before our eyes. Chimegwech.
Mr. President, your turn.
I told Ovide that I thought my role here was to say hello and goodbye, and that those who are the experts could speak to this. I have studied computer science and theology and only enough law to be dangerous. Others here are experts. They know I have opinions, but I'll just express an opinion or two. With respect to this business of the environment and Indigenous people, I think we have some good examples at the University of Manitoba of working together. I just was privileged to give David Suzuki a copy of a book by some of our colleagues, David Barber and his brother, Doug, entitled Two Ways of Knowing, that brings together the scientific approach that our Arctic science team takes in the north with the perspectives of Indigenous people who have been living there and experiencing climate change. And so these two ways of knowing, the traditions and the remembering of experience and the scientific investigation, come together well and tell us the same thing, that substantial changes are occurring. But I'm also quite struck by the reality of places where we have gone wrong and not worked well together. I have spent a lot of time in the last few years on various aspects of this university's relationship with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, with the application to receive here the legacy of material that the Commission has collected and form here the core of a national research center around these and related matters. So all of this work about the Indian residential school experience, I think, makes it easy to see that when people interfere in dangerous ways, ways that are not sensitive, we can cause long-term effects in people, in the environment, that were not intended. And the challenge, I think, for us in this realm that we're discussing is to know how or when we're learning in a good way and how or when we're interfering in dangerous ways. And I think that's a big challenge, because the world that we live in is different in many ways than the world in which our parents and our ancestors lived. Of course, there are many continuities, but there are changes. The simple fact that there are more of us means that we need to take more care about the resources that we use, and especially the resources that we consume. And it's clear that we've not yet learned to live sustainably in the world at the population level we're at, or with the ways in which we think about these things. We need to learn how to do this, and we need to, I think, have the will to do it. There are many times when we know things and don't have the will to act on them. So we need to have the will to act as individuals, and we need to have the will to act politically. And I expect we'll talk about various aspects of this through the remainder of our time together. Now, I'm pleased to say that I spent some time with Elder Dave Courchene a few weeks ago. He was kind enough to arrange a sweat ceremony for me. Ovide took me there, and it was a very good experience for me. And as a result of that, that David gave this David a spiritual name, Kanibuit Wapshki Mukwa. For those of you who would prefer it in English, standing white bear. And I would just observe to my senior advisor, there's nothing about talking there, and so I'm done.
He pronounced that pretty perfect. Yeah, so he's been practicing. So our final speaker for this part of the panel is our special guest and our friend, David Suzuki.
I saw Ovide this morning tell everybody on the morning session, you got 5 minutes each, and then he used 15 minutes for himself. So I thought I would get back at him today and maybe go a little over 5 minutes. I come from a city called Vancouver, which is one of our First Nations chiefs told us is the largest clear-cut in Canada invaded by an alien species. I'm a biologist, and I tend to look at the world through the eyes of evolution. And as I told the morning session here, geneticists today can use DNA to track the movement of people across the planet over time. So we can trace backward, where did the genes in this location or in that location, where did they come from? And all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. That was the birthplace of our species. I can't wait to give a speech to the Ku Klux Klan and tell them that. I don't know what the hell their problem is, but we're all Africans. If you try to imagine the plains of Africa 150,000 years ago, they were filled with animals in abundance and variety beyond anything we would see on the Serengeti today. And you'd have to look very carefully to spot little clusters of 3, 4, or 5 of these funny-looking, two-legged, furless apes. And that was us. And when you think of it, compared to the other animals, we weren't very impressive. You got to wonder, how the hell did we get to a point where we've taken over the planet? Well, of course, our secret was invisible. It was the 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls. That was our advantage. That organ made us very curious. We were inventive. We remembered. And those qualities of curiosity, inventiveness, and a great memory more than compensated for our lack of physical or sensory ability. And it eventually then took us, it conferred one other quality that was very special. We recognized that what we do today can affect this thing we call a future. No other animal on the planet has a sense of a future as we do. That's a human invention, the idea of a future. And because we invented the idea of a future, we're the only animal that realized we can affect the future by what we do today. Drawing on our experience and knowledge and our memory, we can see if you go that way that might be dangerous, but that way you might find something good to eat. And so I believe foresight, that ability to look ahead, was the great quality that distinguished our species and enabled us to get to a position of dominance today. So now we have all of the amplified ability to look ahead. We have scientists, we have engineers, we have supercomputers. And for over 40 years, the leading scientists of the world have been telling us we're heading down a very dangerous path, that there are opportunities that lie in changing direction. And now we are turning our backs on the very survival mechanism of our species. We're turning our backs on that foresight and denying and complicating it. How on earth did we get to this position? For 95% of our existence on Earth, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We followed plants and animals through the seasons. When you depend on living survival that way, you know very well that you are utterly embedded in and dependent on nature for your health and well-being. 10,000 years ago, we began the agricultural revolution, and that changed the course of human history. For the bulk of people who depended on agriculture, we now had a reliable source of food, and we could stay in one place, build permanent structures, communities, and societies resulted as a consequence of agriculture. And farmers know very well we are utterly dependent on weather and climate for how well we do, that insects are important for pollination, certain species of plants fix nitrogen from the air as fertilizer in the soil. They know the amount of snow in the winter is directly related to the amount of moisture in the soil in the summer. Farmers know we are dependent on nature. In 1900, when there were 2 billion people in the world, there were only 14 cities with more than 1 million people. So the vast majority of people lived in rural village communities because most people were involved in some aspect of agriculture. We went through an incredible shift in the last 100 years. By the year 2000, there were now 6 billion people, 4 times as many people, but now there were more than 400 cities with more than 1 million people. In countries like Canada, over 85% of us now live in cities. We transitioned from a rural agricultural animal to a big city dweller. And in a big city, you see that your highest priority is your job. You need a job to make the money to buy the things you want. And so because of that move or transformation away from rural living, the economy then has become our highest priority. So we actually elect people to office who tell us we can't do anything about climate change, it'll destroy the economy. So we elevate the economy above the very things that keep us alive. And this is the challenge that we face. So we forget that the very word economy comes from the Greek word ekos, which means our household or domain. Ecology is the study of our household, and economics is its management. So ecologists try to find out what are the principles, the conditions of sustainable living, of organisms living indefinitely in an area. And the idea should be that economics then says to ecologists, hey, what are those principles? We don't want to do anything that'll bugger up what those principles of sustainability are. But when we say we can't afford to do that, we elevate the economy above ecology. That's the reason why Tara and I have spent over 30 years now working with Indigenous people in Canada as well as other parts of the world, because they teach us that there are other values. We are both adopted by the Haida people, and we're very proud of the fact that Haida despite their need for more jobs, for economic opportunity, opposed the logging practices of forestry industries. They were desperate for economic development, but they nevertheless fought against the practices and have changed the whole nature of forestry in their territory. They told us then there are things more important than money. And it's not an accident, I think, that up and down the coast of British Columbia, and Tara has gone to every single First Nations community along the coast from the north of Vancouver Island up to the tip of Alaska. And every community she encountered has first said, we need jobs. We need community economic development. They're desperate for jobs. And you can bet that Enbridge, the pipeline builder, and the government of Canada has offered them millions of dollars to sign on the line and say, yes, you can put the pipeline through our territory. And yet they are 100% opposed to the pipeline. And I agree. But if you look at the response of Enbridge and the National Energy Board and the government, they don't get the message. They're being told loud and clear, our culture, our land, our way of life is more important than money. We're not hearing that, and I thank the Coastal First Nations for standing so firmly and trying to educate us about that fact. The Toltan people in the sacred headwaters of 3 great rivers that run in northern British Columbia have been suddenly given the economic opportunity of opening up mines throughout their territory. Again, these are very poor people, and yet they are opposed to the coming into the sacred headwaters. Don't we understand what the word sacred means? Sacred means something is more important and precious than anything that can be measured in economic terms. I visited Elsipogtog, where the Mi'kmaq are fighting against fracking and these are also communities that need jobs, and yet they are talking about the sacred water on which everyone depends. The battle lines are very clear, and we are being informed of values that I believe that the dominant society desperately needs. Because if we don't pay attention and realize that the economy is there to serve us to some other greater end, not an end in itself, then we will continue on the destructive path we're on. Thank you.
Did he take 10 minutes? You should have taken 20, right? We have a limited time, so we were going to ask 2 questions and have the panel respond separately. So what I'm going to do is ask both questions at the same time, and they can respond in their own fashion, right, to either question or no question. And if I can find the questions. The first one is, and this sort of flows from David's talk about First Nations, the environment, and the economy, the poverty and the need for jobs and development. With the growing demand for natural resources and energy, how will Aboriginal and treaty rights be affirmed? Second question is, what role will Indigenous ecological knowledge play in defining Canadian policies on biodiversity, conservation, natural resource management, and environmental protection in the 21st century? What we're hoping to achieve here in this panel is to build awareness that the issues facing this country are not just issues for Canadians, that these are issues for First Nations people, for the Métis and Inuit as well. And it really is about the idea of relationships, the covenant that was established at the time of settlement, and continuing that in that vein, ensuring that whatever we do in the future is based on this idea of mutual gain, mutual benefit. And that, of course, does not mean no development. It doesn't mean that our people never use the resources for themselves, because our people did too. That we use the resources for our livelihood. But what we have to try to come to terms is going forward as a country, how do we make sure that the First Nations people, the Métis and Inuit, are not the victims of development? So these questions having to do with the demand for energy, the demand for economy, and the role of the Indigenous ecological knowledge is try to capture a discussion around that topic. So what I'll do in order to give that David over there a break is I'm going to begin with Aimée on this part of our panel.
Good. Well, thank you. I want to address both questions together. I'm not going to privilege one over the other, but I think that it's necessary to understand that a lot of what we have to contribute as Indigenous people to the recognition of treaties happens outside of what we might think as a common context in the courtrooms. And I say this having been a lawyer, and I've worked with the federal court on guidelines for Aboriginal law matters, but I think that there's something fundamental that's lacking in our understanding of treaties, and that we have some important societal work to do there. In 1969, the Canadian government suggested that we do away with treaties. And I'm a little bit younger than the Davids and Ovide on the panel. You might have a living memory of that. And I'm quite sure we had a very strong response saying, no, our treaties are sacred documents. They confirm our relationship. And from a very practical standpoint, I think it's important to recognize them today in the sense that they confirm the legitimacy of the settler presence on the territory. And if we use that as a starting point in saying there is no legitimate settler presence, there is no Canada without treaties, then we are playing a very different game. We're understanding things very differently. And I would suggest that's the place that we need to be starting from, and recognizing what it is those treaties actually mean. I suggested to you earlier an Anishinaabe understanding of law that is quite different. And if you look at the treaties that were made, including Treaty 1 that was made in this territory, we used Anishinaabe law to make the treaty, and we continue to use it to affirm the treaty, what it should look like today. And it has built into it, maybe not in the paper form, and maybe the Supreme Court of Canada will never see the intricacies of Treaty 1, and they may never understand it, but you and I can. We can understand what Treaty 1 means if we seek out that knowledge, if we ask for that understanding of what is equal treatment and non-interference. In Anishinaabe law, nobody is above or below anyone else. And that is a fundamental principle that I think we need to take into account when we're looking at natural resources. In Anishinaabe law, we don't look at land as separate from the resources that are on it or separate from the water that flows through it. It's one's concept. And so we need to set aside some of those preconceptions that we have, like ideas of ownership as well, to have a true understanding. And how do we do that? In part, it's the sacred knowledge that Indigenous elders and knowledge holders and law keepers have. And we need to start accessing that knowledge as the basis of our understanding and the basis of the legitimacy of how we interact on this territory, and we share what comes from this territory, what feeds and sustains all of us. I have two truths to share. One is that Western science, I'm going to use that term very blanketly, you can disagree with me on the use of the term. Western science and courts of law have a lot of difficulty hearing, listening to, and understanding Anishinaabe law, Anishinaabe principles. And I say law, but it's way more holistic. It's not about Indigenous ecological knowledge. I think ecological knowledge actually limits us. It's about knowing about a good way of living, and knowing about a way of living. And some of this work is ongoing, and it was mentioned, Ovide, when you introduced me, that I'm working with elders in Manitoba on a water project, and we're trying to confirm what are some of the Anishinaabe legal principles that relate to water, what are our responsibilities to water. And that's work that then goes and informs and should work with Western science knowledge, and it has to be integrated in our process of decision making. So often I've appeared at administrative tribunals and said, you know, we have these different views and they're heard, but they're not part of the decision making, the ultimate decision making. And that's where we have that work to do. Uncovering, some discovering, and that communicating, being in dialogue. And I'm going to suggest that part of how we do that is through a process of reconciliation. But I'm going to say that reconciliation right now is being used in a particular way by the courts that I don't think I agree with. Actually, I know I disagree with it because it's all over the place. It talks about reconciling the assertion of British sovereignty and the prior occupation of Indigenous people. And I would say that reconciliation actually means coming together. What Elder Bone has shared with me is a guiduin, that idea of coming together. And that if we look at reconciliation in that way, that idea of coming together and sharing, doing what it is that we said we would do in the treaties, then we have somewhere good to go together.
So I'm going to go back to David Boyd.
Thank you, Ovide. Well, this has been a tremendous learning experience, being at the ceremony this morning and being at this panel this afternoon. I think that it's really important for those of us who are not Aboriginal people to recognize that Canada has three founding legal systems. We have the British common law, which is well known. We have the French civil law, which is well known. But really, we have to integrate those two legal systems with Indigenous law. And this is something that the Supreme Court of Canada has actually referred to, moving forward to achieve reconciliation between the French, the British, and the founding people of Canada. We need to integrate those three legal systems. And so I'm tremendously excited when I hear Professor Aimée Craft saying that, you know, the right to a healthy environment is already from that perspective, is already in Canada's Constitution because it's Anishinaabe constitutional law. And the reason I talk about constitutional law, and I don't want to see anybody yawning when I say that phrase, is because constitutional law is the highest and most powerful law that we have as a society. And it's also more than that. It's not just a law, it's a reflection of our deepest and most cherished values of a people. And so the absence in the existing paper of the Canadian Constitution of any reference to the environment really is a complete failure in terms of who we are as Canadians. And what's really interesting in terms of the evolution of law in Canada, in two recent Aboriginal law cases, the Delgamuukw case and the Williams case, both from British Columbia, the Supreme Court of Canada has defined this notion of Aboriginal title, what it means as land ownership. And they've said something that to me as a lawyer is really fascinating. They've said a bunch of things about it. It's a collective form of ownership. But what I'm really interested in here for our purposes today is that it includes an obligation to treat the land with respect so that future generations can enjoy that land. And I read that and I think that is so profoundly wise. But why the hell does it only apply to Aboriginal title? I mean, we all depend on clean air, clean water, fertile soil, and healthy ecosystems. Why would we have a form of title or land ownership for Aboriginal people that recognizes that and ensures that we respect the rights of future generations, when for the vast majority of land in Canada, we don't have that. That makes no sense to me. And so that's why we need to change our constitution in Canada, to recognize that we all share fundamental environmental rights and responsibilities, something that's already happening in over 100 countries around the world, and something that results in stronger environmental laws, better enforcement of those laws, a greater citizen voice in decision-making that affects the environment, and most importantly, cleaner air, cleaner water, healthier ecosystems. And we can look to leadership from Aboriginal people, Indigenous cultures in other societies. One of the most incredible developments in the last 5 years is that in Bolivia and in Ecuador, they've included not only the right to live in a healthy environment and the responsibility to protect the environment in their constitutions, their fundamental laws, they've included the rights of Mother Earth in their constitutions. And that really is a profound shift in world perspective. And also, just tying back in as my final remark, what I've learned today about what Professor Craft said about the good life. Well, that's written into the Bolivian and Ecuadorian constitutions now as their fundamental overriding objective, something that in Quechua, the Quechua language is called sumac kase, but it means a good life. It doesn't mean being rich, it means being wealthy in the non-material sense of kinship, family, love, kindness, and relations with the land. So that's where we need to go as a country.
David Courchene Jr.
Thank you, Ovide. You know, I'm sitting here really overwhelmed because there's so much challenges in front of us. And when we talk about our responsibilities that we have as the human family, you know, within the lodges of our people, it's very well understood that there is a law. It's talked about an Anishinaabe law. And there's one law particularly that I think that really lays the foundation of our understanding of our relationship to each other and to the earth. And it's a law that we call Ogititibakonekeo, the great binding law of the Creator, that connects us all, that connects us to the land, to everything that is alive. And look at what we have done to the land, to the earth, by destroying that part of the family that we call the animal world. And yet the animal world was put there for a reason for us, so that they could teach us how to live on the land. And yet we go out there and we destroy the very thing that should and could be helping us. And also within the understanding of the great binding law, it is understood by our people, you know, that there's one source of power that gives each of us life, that gives earth life itself, which is the great mystery, the great Creator. And we do not have the human intellectual capability to fully understand this great mystery. What we do is we acknowledge it because we see it and we feel it. And it's very difficult to intellectualize something that is so powerful. And we look at our present situation in terms of when it comes to the treaty relationship in this country, we know that it's a disaster for us. Because what they did after the signing of those treaties, they went into their House of Parliament, enacted a legislation which is the most racist act in this country called the Indian Act, that tells me how I should be an Anishinaabe. They have no right to tell me who I am. How could they tell me who I am when they know nothing about me? And they refuse to learn about who I am. The treatise itself, to me, it was about a spirit and intent. And our people to be treated that we do have a voice. We do have a voice in terms of sharing a knowledge and an understanding and how we should treat the earth and how we should treat each other as the human family. We have failed in so many ways because we've restricted ourselves to a secular type of living. We've designed our world that these institutions and concepts that we are presently supporting, we know they're destroying the water, we know that they're destroying the air, but we feel helpless. Say, what can I do? And yet there is something we can do. And it has to begin with an individual. You know, when I look outside these windows and I see our brother, the trees, I have an alliance with those trees. They're listening to what I'm saying. And as they listen to what I'm saying, they said, someone is speaking about the truth that is carried by the people here that we call Ogichitibako Nigewit. They will talk to that tree, and they'll keep talking to all the trees. There's something happening. There's something going on. We're here. And that's what the elders always tell us. Be careful when you're in nature. Don't just say any old thing, any old time, and be angry. Because if you go to the land and you have an expression of anger, the trees move away. They don't want to listen to you. They don't want to listen to anger. They don't want to listen to all that we seem to reflect in society today. The bitterness, the separation that we live in our society today. And if you look at the symbols that are right in front of us, the sun is shining out today. And if we all went out and stood in front of the sun would shine on all of us, which is a representation and a reflection of the love that the Creator has for all of us. No one is above or less than any other human life in this world. We are all connected in the most equal, loving way that the Creator has blessed us with life. We need to move beyond the secular world that we have created, that we have supported and continue to support. We have to disengage from those things that we know that are wrong. And this is where I keep appealing to the hearts of the human family. Allow the original people to take the lead here. Can you do that? Can you offer that support to the original people of this part of the world? Said, you take the lead because we have made a mess. In prophecy, they said the land will return back to us because we know how to take care of the land. And it will come back. It will come back because we know what we need to do. And we have the protocols, that have been handed down by our ancestors. How to show simple words of gratitude to the earth and say, thank you. Miigwech gjemanito. Miigwech nokomis. Miigwech memenosh. That's all it takes in order to begin that process of our own healing and to reconcile, what we have done to each other, to reconcile to what we have done to the earth, to reconcile to what has been done to the first peoples in this part of the world, where we continue to live in imposition on a legislation that has no right to impose on another people, especially the original people of this land. We are the original people here. And then the rest of the people, you came here for a reason. You didn't come here to come and impose your values. You didn't come here to come and conquer a people. That was not your journey and why you are here. You came here to learn. You came here to learn about how to treat the land and how to treat each other. And we have that opportunity today as the human family to join in those efforts, to create an education and an awareness beginning with our own children. We need to take the children back to the land. We need to get them to feel the land itself. And they need to hear the teachings that are in the trees. I've done a lot of work with young people, and people laugh and say, oh, there goes Dave again. He's that stupid thing that he does. Takes the kids to go and talk to the trees. The trees don't talk. The trees have nothing to say. But that is so far from the truth. The birds have something to say. The animals have a lot to say. And they want people like ourselves to speak on their behalf, because that is our sacred duty and responsibility as human beings, to act as the voice of nature itself. And then what is so exciting about this time? That we have an opportunity to fulfill the great dream of the Creator. And what is that? It's to bring peace into this world. How will we do it? We will return back to the land and make peace with the earth. Once we have made peace with the earth, it'll be a lot easier to make peace amongst ourselves. But let us make peace with the earth, first and foremost, as that journey that we need to take, as we need to find the original instruction that we were all given, which is a reflection of the great binding law that we call Ogichitibako Negewen. Within that tree out there, you see that what is imprinted within the seed of that tree is how to be a tree, how to be an eagle, how to be a buffalo, how to be a fish, how to be a mosquito. But so does how to be a human being is in each and every one of us. It's inside of us. We got to stop looking for answers outside of us. We got to make the journey inside, where the answer is in all of us. Not one people, it's in all of us. And that's the leadership of the indigenous peoples of this part of the world that is appealing to all. Please go within yourself and find the solutions that will take us beyond this insanity. We know that the economic system is a system that is suicidal. We know it, but we don't know how to get out of it. The Spirit will help us to get out of it. Take the time and go and talk to a few trees. They'll help you. They'll encourage you and they'll inspire you. Thank you.
David?
I refuse to talk after David Courchene. Absolutely refuse. He said it all.
Okay then.
May I pose a question?
Yes.
For those of you who are legal experts, the Supreme Court of Canada has, in the relatively recent past, dealt with a number of treaty rights and land use cases. Do you take heart from those decisions, or do you see a pattern there? Is it a pattern that we should welcome? Is it a pattern that needs to develop, needs to change? What do you see in the decisions of the Supreme Court?
I would say I'm both encouraged and discouraged, because I think we're working within a framework that's limited by accessing and understanding our treaty and Aboriginal rights through courts. I think, and we have a conference here at the university that's coming up in November that's going to deal with two recent decisions, Chilcotin and Keewaydin, and there's some important discussion that's going to happen. We're bringing in experts from across Canada to talk about what the implications of those decisions are. But the framework itself, I think, is somewhat limited. And part of what I'm going to say at that conference is I don't understand how we could possibly have irreconcilable decisions that look to nations, First Nations, Indigenous nations in Canada as having title and recognizing inherent rights to land. And in the same, almost the same breath, a Supreme Court of Canada that says, we don't recognize the inherent value and sovereignty that flows from the treaties of this land. So I find a lot of difficulty in reconciling those points of view. Of course, there are nuggets of gold in there that, it was a big success for Aboriginal law lawyers to hear the Supreme Court of Canada say, we now recognize semi-nomadic title, which, that was never recognized before. So I feel like we're taking small steps through the courts, but if we keep taking very small steps, we're not going to achieve the big things that we really need to do. So I'm encouraged by the words of the individual work that we have to do ourselves while relying on the courts and multiple strategies at the same time. But the big piece is actually recognizing each other, understanding each other, and saying, what do we have in common as a human family, but where do we want to go together?
Well, I would say the same thing that David Suzuki said about following Dave Courchene, is Aimée said everything that I would say.
Well, someone has to follow David. So it might as well be David.
I'm very, very, the whole legal system kind of scares the hell out of me, especially when you get lawyers involved. I tend to think of the issue as something that we've got to come to grips with as, what are we as an animal? What are we as human beings? And I like to begin this discussion by telling this story. The first time I realized I could read was in 1940 when I was 4 years old. And Dad was taking me down in a trolley to see a movie in Vancouver. And I said, Dad, I can read that sign. And the sign said, do not spit. In 1940, there were signs everywhere telling people don't spit. There were spittoons, so that if you had to gob into a spittoon. And cut ahead 70 years, there are no signs anywhere saying do not spit. There are no spit police. You don't teach kids in kindergarten now, do not spit. There are places, the first time I went to China, we did a film of an operation on a woman's thyroid, and the surgeon was cutting her throat, pulled back from the table, pulled his mask and spit on the floor in China. So, the attitude towards, but in Canada, we all know you don't gob in public. I mean, and if you did, people would not like that. And I feel that in terms of our relationship with Mother Earth, we're back 70 years. You have to say to people, don't litter. You got to, don't do this, don't do that. It's got to be something that is just so deep within us. We just don't do. You don't treat your mother that way. So how do we do that? I got a call from the CEO of a very large company working in the Alberta tar sands. And he said, could I come and talk to you? I said, yeah, I'd be delighted. Come on. Came down the next day. And I said, you know, I'm so honored that you came. Thank you very much. But before you come through this door, I want you to leave your identity outside the door. You're no longer the CEO of a company. I want to meet you as a human being because I'm not prepared any longer to fight. I'm not going to negotiate. I want to work together, but I want to work together when we both agree on what our most fundamental needs are. Can we not, as human beings, agree on our most basic needs, and then we can build from that? Well, I could see right away he was very, very nervous. I mean, he had come to negotiate. And so he came in, and I said, well, what do you think is the most important need every human being on the planet has? Well, he didn't really know. So I said, you know, if you don't have air for 3 minutes, you're dead. If you have to breathe polluted air, you're sick. Could we not agree that clean air is the absolute highest priority that we have? And then I said, if you don't have water for 3 days, you're dead. If you have polluted water, you're sick. Can we put clean water up there and then clean soil that gives us our food? Can we not agree that every one of us has this need for our very survival and well-being? Then we can say, where do we go from here? How do we develop an economy? How do we live together? He couldn't agree. And I realized that the problem is that he functions as a CEO of a company and the rules are very, very clear. And to get out of that, it's simply he can't do his job anymore. And he didn't come to talk to me as a human being to human being about what our most basic needs are. And that's why in this, the Blue Dot Tour, yes, I think it would be very, very exciting if we were to enshrine the right to a healthy environment in our Constitution. But it's the conversation that's most important. You know, we haven't got our minds around the most basic things that we all share and should be working together to protect for a future for our children. So anyway, that's all I've got to say about that.
We're going to close fairly soon, but we had invited a graduate student, Stuart Hill, to be present during the panel and to be prepared to summarize what the panelists are doing. And Stuart is a second-year PhD student, and he's working in his own First Nation community, God's Lake First Nation. And he's working on a watershed management protection plan for his community. More than 90% of First Nations communities in Manitoba do not have a watershed management protection plan. And Mr. Hill is leading the way for that kind of engagement. No, not just for his community, but also in a broader sense. He is a Cree and fluent in his own language, and is very informed about Indigenous knowledge, and is helping integrate this knowledge with Western science. So we're very pleased to have him present in this room, and he's been paying a lot of attention, and he's not afraid of any David, are you? Yeah. So come on up, Stuart, and give us a summary of the panel's discussion.
Yeah, I'm just a little taller than everybody. Yeah, I was here this morning, and Elder Harry Bone said the first thing you should do when you go up to speak is speak in your language. And how you would say that is, in my Cree language, is Nishtam maot ke gonan magawi tutaman deriyamian. Hinini mo bitama, tagisken taman dante urstian. That's basically what he said. You should say something in your language so you know where you're coming from and who you are. And I just did that. I'm very honored to be here, to be standing in front of this distinguished panel. Very, very honored. As Ovide mentioned, I'm from God's Lake, and it was only recently that I started to learn. Not too long ago, about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I started to learn what David Courchene talks about. And that is our responsibility to take care of Mother Earth. Our responsibility to speak for Mother Earth. Because we all have a common future. We all have a common existence. And I just learned that I started learning that not too long ago. But the thing is, I already knew from my parents the bits and pieces of it. All I needed was somebody to bring it together for me. And that happened with an elder. Many elders. I've had many teachers. And I appreciate that message from the panel that first and foremost is the Creator. We have to listen. In our language we say Mantu. Mantu is Creator. Mantu is God. That is how we say it in our Cree language. Next, just to reflect, I think that the Blue Dot Tour and what Dr. Suzuki is trying to do is to give life to that responsibility that we have to take care of our Mother Earth. So I think he's trying to take it a step further. Not only do we need to protect our environment and our world and our Earth, we need to live it. That's the key, I think, to the Blue Dot Tour. We are trying to say everybody has the right to live in a clean environment. And the other thing, too, from the traditional teachings is that everybody is entitled to a good life. Everybody. Doesn't matter who you are. We are all equal. And all of us deserve to live a good life. That is why we need to change things. The Indian Act, we need to get rid of that. This dysfunctional relationship that we have with the country and Canada, under the Indian Act. It's a very dysfunctional relationship. And we need to change that so that everybody will be entitled to have a good life. And I know there was a lot of stuff said about the means and the how to do this, but I just wanted to maybe reflect a little bit on the Manitoba context. We are in Manitoba. I think about over half of our province is developed for hydroelectric development, mining, mineral exploration, all kinds of resource allocations. But there are certain parts of our province that are not touched, like the far north, the Dene country, towards the territories, the east side of Lake Winnipeg, and my area, the northeast Manitoba. And that's the God's Lake, Oxford Lake, Island Lake, and then down the east side of Lake Winnipeg. We have an opportunity right now to plan for those areas, these pristine areas. And I'm thinking that maybe we have a chance here to do things right. To do things the way it should have been done a long time ago. And that is one of my hopes in my PhD research that we do things right, you know, and it'll be consistent with the Blue Dot Tour. It will be very consistent. We will have an opportunity to benefit from our resources and to live a good life. And just to end off, I just wanted to say that on behalf of Indigenous people, I think that we should say thank you to Dr. Suzuki for giving us this opportunity. So if you could say thank you. And that pretty well concludes my reporting. Those are my reflections on, and I'm very honored. Thank you.
I have to recognize some people of power in this room. So I want to acknowledge David's wife, Tara Cullis, co-founder of the Suzuki Foundation. And their daughter, Severin Cullis Suzuki. Thank you for coming to Winnipeg. And not my place to do it, but I'll do it. Thank you for supporting David. We're almost done. We're going to have some closing remarks by our president, and then I'll close with a few remarks myself.
Well, I'll be very brief. I want to thank all of the participants for doing this. I want to thank Ovide and the team of people here at the university who worked to make this happen, and of course, David and everyone from the Suzuki Foundation. And we're really thankful that you've included the University of Manitoba in your Blue Dot Tour, particularly meaningful for us because you've said this is your last cross-country tour. Of course, we've heard that from Mick Jagger and others. So if there's another last tour, we hope we'll be part of that as well. But seriously, your work's appreciated by Canadians of every generation, and that work is a gift to all of us. So we wish you the best as you continue in your journey, and I want to thank everyone for coming to this session. Miigwech.
I was commenting to David Suzuki as I was looking at the crowd. I said, that's a pretty young crowd. But actually, I think I'm just getting old. And you may not be as young as you look. But, so everything is relative, isn't it? I wanted to comment on this idea of Indigenous knowledge and how that would apply to any project anywhere in this country. What we have in Canada is this idea of what is permissible from the point of view of what's in the public interest. And it usually means that the economy trumps all other interests. But from the Indigenous point of view, we don't have the concept of the public interest. We have this idea of the common good, the common interest, which is a different standard, a different test altogether. So there is a role in environmental protection and also in environmental assessment for Indigenous knowledge and beliefs. And we live in a country right now where it appears that the politicians are preoccupied with this idea of maintaining wealth, maintaining the status quo, and to accomplish that, they're quite prepared to eliminate certain environmental regulations or standards to fast-track the approval of projects. So the only option you have as Canadians really is to stand up with Aboriginal people. Because we have enshrined in the Supreme Law the protection of Treaty and Aboriginal rights. Now, it may not be clear that these rights are fully defined right now, and that there may be a lot of gray area in that context. But the reality is, it is a vehicle to prevent development at any cost. And for that reason, many First Nations people are positioning themselves to stand in the way of development that they can support. And they have only two avenues available to them. One is protest, public protest, and the other one is litigation, going after the governments. But where are the Canadian people? If they really believe in the message that Dr. Suzuki has been giving for decades, it's time for them, for the Canadians, to stand up with us. Because the environmental laws that you have now are not going to do it for you anymore. The governments have made it very clear that their priority is the economy. And given that mantra of those in power with the power to create law or amend law, the standards are lowering. But my concern, and this is what I want to express to you, my concern is this whole idea about terrorism, the preoccupation of governments in identifying enemies within a nation state. That it is now possible to monitor Aboriginal leaders, and it has been for many years, to monitor their movements, to assess what they're saying, to report to CSIS and organizations like the RCMP on the activities of certain Aboriginal leaders. But not only that, environmental groups are being assessed too. We are moving in the wrong direction in this country, away from a free society to a society that is more concerned about security. Security as defined by the people in power. And I think when it comes to this idea of people standing against the frac sand economy, Canadians should stand up with that. But it's not happening. Instead, what is happening is the same silos exist in this country, the same isolation that I experienced when I was a leader at one time, and that there is no coming together of people, and we need to come together. So part of it is this idea of getting to know each other as human beings. And that's what encourages me about the current conversation that is begun by the elders, that is being picked up by a few of our leaders. But we need you to pick it up as well. The idea that you will collaborate, that you will seek to understand, and that we will work together to make a better country for everyone, not just for a few. So thank you for coming. Appreciate your time.